on now. I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a ball now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a ball now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power.
Hey folks, so today we're going to be covering interior environments. Welcome everybody, day 2. I know there were a couple of hiccups with some of yesterday's sessions, but judging by the numbers, it's looking like people are starting to flow in, so that's great. One thing I want to flag is that throughout this session, we're going to have Alex Stevens helping me out through just a little bit of chit chat, a little bit of dialogue as we go along.
Howdy.
He has a buzzsaw in the background for the next 5 minutes, so he might be a little quiet for the start of this session. So my apologies. But well, yeah, we're going to do our best to kind of walk through. I have the chat running on the left-hand side, so if I'm glancing over here, it's not because I'm just sick of you, it's because I'm just trying to keep an eye on what's going on. We're going to be stepping through a few things today. I'll show you the environment that we'll be looking at. So we're going to be stepping through a few things today. This environment's pretty much what we're going to roughly try and create. I popped it together pretty quickly as a well, let me rephrase. I popped it together pretty quickly compared to how long I would genuinely spend on an environment that I really wanted to be feature rich. But the intention for today is to really step through the basics of the editor controls, the basics of kind of working with 3D space, and as well as that, kind of working with statically lit scenes. So it's worth noting that there's a bit of a trick when you first teach someone Unreal, and that is if you want to teach them outdoor environments, you can. You can leap straight into that, and it's great, and it's cool, and it's wonderful. But it also means that you're skipping out on certain topics, because when you create a large outdoor environment, what you're normally creating is something that's going to be dynamically lit, and if you start with outdoor environments before you look at interiors, you kind of miss a chunk of the lessons that you should really be having along the way. You're skipping out on certain content that can be really useful to have as kind of a primer. So for the sake of these sessions, I wanted to start with interiors, work through static lighting and that kind of stuff, and afterwards I'm going to be doing the outdoor environments later on tonight for the 6:30 session. For the record, the outdoor environment tools are way cooler than the interior environment tools, because you can casually just be like, I'm gonna make a mountain, and a mountain appears. So I hope to see some of you at that session as well. But hopefully this helps out for the meantime. Now, just before I move along with this, the other thing that I want to say is towards the end of this session, I'm going to have Alex running through just some of the basics of setting up real-time ray tracing on a machine. Now, I'm not doing that because, full confession, I'm running this off of my laptop, and my laptop's only running a 1070, which so we're kind of relying on Alex's much beefier machine to do real-time ray tracing.
I have the power.
He has the power. So we'll be switching over to that a little bit later on. This will be an experiment in restreaming for me. I've never done that before. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get things rolling. Just going to quickly set things up. Okay. So, to begin with, I would like to quickly share. I'd like to quickly share what I'm basing a lot of this off of. I'm going to begin by actually basing it off of a demo that we have, which is this sequencer demo. However, I'm going to pretty much be ignoring everything that's there for the time being and just making a new environment that's kind of leveraging from those assets. Okay, I want to be able to just kind of have some stuff that's ready to go, because this is more about using the editor today than it is about import pipelines. So I'm going to be beginning by kind of just building off of something. Now, you can access these yourself if you go to the Unreal Engine, the Epic Games launcher, go to Unreal Engine, and you go to the Learn tab. You'll see this project all the way down here called Sequencer. Now, for the sake of this training, both today's lessons and ongoing lessons, I'm going to do my best to build off of assets that are freely available to the public, because I would really love you folks to take stabs at this in your own time. But I'm going to begin by launching over into that. So here we have the first thing you'll see if you were to load this up. If you were to open this up, you should see kind of this basic environment. This is what they had going. This is what happens when you spend more time on something like this. But I actually want to kind of start you in the bare basics. So I'm going to go File, and I'm going to go New Level, and I really want to start something from complete scratch. Someone in the chat has asked, doesn't a GTX 1070 support basic ray tracing? I can run ray tracing on my laptop. It's just not the best environment to be doing it in. You really generally want a 1080 or above for ray tracing, and a laptop 1070 is good, but pretty quickly my laptop gets a little sad with me, and the frame rate sits at about 5 FPS, 10 FPS for something like that. Whereas if I kick it over to Alex's 2080, it's just a wonderful experience.
Buttery smooth.
Buttery smooth. There we go. So I'm going to begin with the basic controls in Unreal. And to begin with, it's worth noting that massive amounts of the editor is completely rebindable. The controls can be switched around in many different ways. So don't treat what I'm doing as like the definitive way to move around. I'm just going to show you my personal workflow on a little of the stuff. Actually, because I want some objects in the distance while I'm showing you the movement controls, I might just put something generic in place. There we go. So the controls are rather simple. I personally prefer to pilot Unreal Engine like it's an FPS game. I grew up on those, so I'm pretty comfortable in that environment. If you want to work it like that, then holding down right click will just allow you to look around with your mouse. And as long as right click is held, you can actually just use W, A, S, and D to move around the viewport. Now, the other thing you can use that's really useful in this regard is while still holding right click, Q will move you down and E will move you up. Okay, so one of the things that we can do here as well is you'll notice that as I move around, we have a reasonably set view speed. If I, while holding right click, scroll up and scroll down, you'll see that my camera speed has dramatically increased. The second I let go of right click, it will return to a default speed. Now, because it returns to a default speed, I can then scroll down to kind of have glacial movement and scroll up to kind of blitz around. This is really useful because if I'm working on something here and I look at something all the way over there, I can be like, huh, and then scroll down again, and then we're at a nice manageable speed for the scene area that I'm working on. So I personally find this to be rather useful. I know plenty of people who use like the orbiting controls, in which you can do that by just holding Alt. If you are using orbiting controls because you're used to that in your your given DDC, then DCC, then you can do that. It's worth noting that for orbiting controls, there are multiple ways to kind of approach that problem. And one of them is under editor preferences. If I do a search for orbit, there is a nice little orbit camera around selection. And if I turn this on, because it is off by default, if I was to select an object, it will now circle that. So if I was to drag this all the way over to there and hold down Alt, it's now going to just circle that point on the scene that I currently have clicked on. Okay. Now that we've kind of just covered the very basics of kind of moving around the viewport, I am going to completely go back to bare basics. It's probably a good idea right now, actually, that I quickly reset my viewport to what you've got by default, because that did not occur to me. One moment. All right. So this is the default. This is the default layout. Now, if you are working with the default layout, I'll be honest with you. It tells you that a lot of things exist at once, but it's really scary. Like the first time you open this up, there's just like your place actors and your outliner and your details and your content browser, and it's just like it's a lot of information at one time. So my personal preference here in setting these things up is I get my content browser, and if I'm using two windows, if I'm using two monitors, I'll throw my content browser onto the other monitor. If I'm using one monitor, I hide my content browser up here in a tab. Okay. Now, the other thing that I personally like to do is I find that the world outliner, I often will dock it over here behind place actors because I'm not generally using both of them at the same time. But that's completely a preference. Now, someone's asked, can you maximize the panel somehow? You sure can. You just hit F11 and it'll go full screen. There's a lesser known shortcut that you can actually use that I think is Shift F11. And if you press Shift F11, it will also hide your start menu, which is great when your boss is walking around and you want to look like you're in hacker mode. So with this kind of going, this is kind of just a general setup of what we could have. Like I said, the world outliner, I could be tucking away and hiding behind this. I personally, it's really up to you how you want to approach this problem. If you feel like you're going to need more view space, then, again, like I could also get the details panel and dock it down the bottom here. And now what I've actually got is just way more screen real estate to really work with. A little tip that I'm just going to show you how to do, but then disable, I personally love using it, is there's a nice little thing in the editor preferences called small toolbar icons. And if I turn that on, you'll see that all of these icons up top just kind of shrink away. And that's I'm going to keep them up there so that folks can kind of see what's going on. But I personally work like this because I habitually know all the shortcuts anyway.
Plus, it makes you look like an absolute pro, right?
That's it. Humble brag right there. But I generally work with small toolbar icons. But when I'm showing people how to do things, I'll do it this way. So one thing that someone has brought up that's rather amusing is, yes, you can use a USB controller. The analog sticks right out of the box will control thing. One thing, yeah, that person's actually illustrating the exact same problem I had with that. One time I thought Unreal Engine was seriously bugged because the screen just kept turning right, and I didn't realize that controllers worked in the editor and that the controller had fallen off my desk, and it just kind of, spun me around for quite a while in a very slow speed. Now, let's go ahead and create something basic. I'm going to create a new level, and it's going to be an empty level. So there's nothing in this. If I look in the world outliner, I can see that nothing exists. Now, I'm actually going to begin not by placing in any 3D meshes or anything like that. I'm going to begin by going to this geometry tab, and I'm going to be working with the BSP tools. Now, the BSP tools, the geometry tools, they're currently getting a bit of a rework. So the stuff that I show you now is useful, but they will be gradually... they will be improving, down the road. You can already start experimenting with the beta ones, but we do keep them turned off by default to kind of keep things clean. So I'm just going to be showing you these ones in the meantime. Now, I'm going to begin by just dragging a box into the scene. So this is what I'm going to be using for kind of blocking out our interior environment. Now, when we have a box in the scene, there's a few ways that we can kind of work with this. Right away, I can see some details about the box that's been dropped in. I can see its position on the X, Y, and Z axes. By the way, because this is an Australian stream, I can say Z and not feel weird about it, which is great. So I can set this out to be 0, 0, and I'll keep that at 100. And if I really want to see what that means in orthographic space, it's worth noting I can always click this button, and it will actually show me the back, right, and top viewports. I generally don't work in that too much, but it is useful to have. Okay? So we've got this kind of set up, and I just out of the gate kind of want to have a reasonably large space because, I might want this to be, say, the floor. So I'm going to tell it to be 1,000 units by 1,000 units. Now, this is just going to be a basic block that we have in place. And there's a few ways that I could go about crafting an environment. It's really up to you how you want to approach this. If I wanted to, I could select this at any point and just alt drag to bring out another one, at which point we now have 2 blocks. Another thing I could be doing is if I wanted to have, say, a corridor going that way, I could select this and I could set my mode to be brush editing mode. Now, if I'm going for a brush editing mode, I'm able to drag this out, and you can see that it's kind of coming out in increments. Now, the reason it's coming out in increments is, by default, we have a snap grid enabled. And I've got this set to 50 right now, but if I was to set this to, say, 500, you can see that my increments are huge now. They're 5 meters. By the way, we work in the metric system, and every unit is, an Unreal unit is 1 centimeter. So I can see here that I'm able to kind of bring things out that way. But another way that I'm actually able to work is by using extrude. So if you click extrude and you drag it out, you can now see that it's added additional verts at that location. So I'm able to kind of grab that, pull it out to wherever I wanted it to. And if I wanted to, I could click on this bit, and once again, I could comfortably extrude. I'm going to turn off this message that it gives me. It's just warning me that it only works in certain coordinate spaces. So again, I could comfortably drag this out to, say, here, have a bit of a thing going. I might widen this up if it was a corridor. Now, if we want to have some idea on what space looks like in this, you can, there's a few different ways you can do it. Now, one nice way is, literally just going in, getting something that we know we have in the content browser. So I'm going to open the content browser, and under assets, I'm going to click static mesh, and I'm just going to drag this asset in. So, I could look at this and be like, that's the size of a pillar, and I know how big a pillar is. Another really useful little thing you can do is holding / which gives you a little preview mesh on your mouse. And you can actually, in your editor preferences, set this to be anything you ever want. And just whenever you tap / it'll just appear at your cursor. So if you constantly have, like, say, a character in a T-pose, or just some sort of object that you always want to have some idea of what that looks like, having that bound to / is really useful. You can actually set them up to have multiple things that you can cycle through as well. I think it's shift / to switch through them. Anyway, so we can see that we've got that this kind of basic setup. I'm going to go ahead, drag those in. Just for the sake of demonstrating how these things work, I might just drag in another box. And
hey Chris, are you able to shift the UVs by any chance?
To shift the views?
The UVs?
Oh, the UVs. Yeah, I'll be doing that in just a bit when I get onto the slightly nicer decorating stage of things. But yeah, you can shift them around and kind of set things up as you want. So I'm just going to pull this down. We're going to just get ourselves very basic environment kind of set up. This part is by no means meant to impress you. By the way, another useful thing that you can do is if you hold down, this is a weird shortcut, so don't feel like you need to know this, but control middle mouse, so holding the middle mouse button like it's like holding the scroll wheel like it's a button, will actually give you this little white line. See that? Now, if I pull this to the left, it'll go to a back view, and I can see that that's there. If I go pull it up, it'll go to my top view, to my front view, to my bottom view. Now, if I go down and to the left is when it goes back to perspective. But there's a great little way to just really quickly be like, oh, what does that look like from on top? Yeah, cool. All right, go back to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, instead of having to click up here and look at the viewport like that, it's a nice little shortcut to just quickly get things going. Now, this space at the moment is representing the floor. Depending on how you want to approach your environment, like, are we building something that's really substantial, or are we building something that is going to be like inside of another block? It means that you might actually want to approach this problem in a slightly different way. You may want to actually go ahead and watch what happens if I drag in a box and I set its location to be 0, 0, 0. So we're just plonking it in the middle of the map. And I'm going to set this size of this box to be rather large. Okay, 4,000 by 4,000 by, let's say 2,000. Now, this box is now engulfing everything. Okay, and if I look inside, I can see that my other ones don't seem to be visible. But if I was to go from lit view over to wireframe view, I can actually see that those boxes still exist. Now, one thing that I find really useful for development practices is to actually use what's called subtractive space. Now, subtractive space means that I can select these, and under here where it says additive, I can tell this to be subtractive. And you'll see that that color has changed. Now, out of the gate, we're still not going to see anything immediately. And the reason we're not is because this box was added last. Now, if I say, hey, pretend that this box was added first, I want you to see what we see instead. We can now see that these subtractive brushes represent negative space inside of that geo. I can now, at my discretion, kind of grab any of these surfaces and, let's say I want to grab this, and this one, and I just want to lift them up a bit. Maybe I want to lift the roof to there. We can now see that that's kind of carved out to there, Or alternatively, if I just wanted to drag in another box and say, hey, you're subtractive now, I could really easily start to create other things. I could, let's say we wanted to have some sort of skylight over here. I can comfortably just grab that, just kind of pull it across. And I'm going to pull you across a little bit as well. And up to the surface. So we can see here that we've created ourselves kind of like this nice little negative space that we're kind of pulling out on. Okay, so it's up to you how you want to work, whether you want to kind of build all of the walls or whether you just want to kind of drop a thing in and be like, this is the room. I personally find negative space, like subtractive space, to be really, really useful for interior environments because I just don't have to think about moving some things around and working with things in certain ways. So you can see here that we've got ourselves like a really, really basic thing. What I would like to do now is to get these walls looking a little more interesting. I'm going to drop that pillar in that I spoke about earlier, just so I've got a nice little point of reference. And I'm just going to apply this material that it has onto my walls. So every mesh inside of the world is, it has two things. It's got a mesh and then it has materials. Materials represent the surface properties, whereas the mesh represents the actual 3D object itself. I've had someone ask about how to get to the edit and extrude controls and such. To get to it, you just go to modes and go brush editing. As a quick heads up, using Shift 1, Shift 2, Shift 3, Shift 4, and Shift 5 to just smash between those is really, really quick. So we've got this going on. We've got ourselves a pillar in play. I would like to have these walls with the same material as the pillar. And to do that's rather easy. I can just select this little magnifying glass on the material, and that will automatically find it for me in the content browser. Now, when it finds it for me in the content browser, what it actually does is it allows me, with it selected, I'm actually able to go through here and just select any of these surfaces. And I'm holding Control to select multiple surfaces. It's worth noting as well that if I wanted to select every wall, I can actually right-click and go select. And there is a, oh, sorry, it's under this one, geometry select, and you can say all adjacent wall surfaces, and it will automatically select every adjacent wall, which is just a quick way. It means I don't have to go through and manually control click everything, because that would be a giant waste of time. So I've got those selected, and I'm just going to say under here, surface material, apply. And this will automatically apply the one that I had selected in my content browser. And I know a bunch of you are probably like, aha, Chris, your UVs are terrible. And you're right, we're in shame. But we can fix that super easily. So what I personally like to do is just go to alignment, and you can literally say either align surface planar wall, or there's another one. If you have like the walls and the floors selected, you can say, hey, project it like a box, and that'll handle your walls and your floors and such as well. Now, again, with all of those surfaces selected, I can see that there are 3 things here and there's 2 things here. So I probably want to, so the YouTube comment that's just, Chris, your UVs are terrible.
Savage.
Mean. So anyway, I probably want to just multiply this by a couple of values, right? So I'm just going to select the surfaces and I'm just going to say, hey, times it by 1.5, apply. And you can now see that that's good. This has actually got a dark lip at the top and this has a light lip at the top. So they are slightly out of alignment. You can just pan the UVs though by using the surface properties here still. So I can comfortably say, hey, I want to move these down this much. I guess in this case, I want to have, it's about there. Seems good. Ship it. Almost. Oh yeah, by the way, a thing that I do quite often is zooming in. Again, it's while holding down right click, C, it just decreases the field of view. So you're zooming in, and Z will give you that whole fisheye aesthetic, so you can feel like you're moving quick. The latter is used pretty rarely, but C is really useful for just examining things. So it's up to you how you want to handle that. Again, that only works while holding right click. But yeah, so you can see we kind of have just some walls blocked out. We've got that Doom vibe going on right now. And again, I'm going to select all of the surfaces. So I'm just going to say, hey, select all coplanar surfaces. And I'm going to set this to be some sort of floor. In the content browser, I'm just going to do a search for the word floor. and I can see that there's a couple of options there. So I'm going to select that back in the untitled. I'm then going to set it as my floor. That worked right out of the gate, so that's great. And I'm going to do the same thing here. And if I'm really lucky, there's going to be a roof, concrete. All right, what do we? Ceiling, sorry. Fancy. All right. So similar thing, we've applied the ceiling. Honestly, I would like this not tiling quite as much, so I'm just going to quickly smash that out to be much bigger UVs, same as before. So you can see here that we've kind of just increased the size of that. We now have ourselves kind of working in something. It's at this point, it's probably a good idea for me to start placing some lights and just some general, slightly nicer block out of the environment. So I'm just going to go back into place mode, which is just here. Again, Shift 1 is to do that. Now, if you want to place lights, there's a few ways we can go about it. In the Place Actors window, I could type in the word light, and it's just going to give me a listing of every single light that we could use. That's useful. What I find is when I'm placing work lights, the quickest way to do it is to hold L and just click. And you can see that when we're in lit mode, which is here, I switched to it through Alt 4, you can see that we've now just got the ability to kind of just drag some lights around. By Alt dragging, I'm able to kind of copy these and place them wherever I want. It's really great to see all of the discussion happening, by the way, in the comments. That's really, really useful for me. I'm generally not a trainer per se, so it's nice having questions and things like that coming through. So please keep that up and don't feel like you're nagging me or anything. So I've kind of just dropped in some really quick work lights. We can see that we've got reasonably simple environment going. One thing to be wary of that's very easy to miss is by default there's this setting turned on under exposure. Okay, so exposure will automatically apply game settings, and right out of the box, Unreal has some settings set up for eye adaptation. Okay, now the problem is that eye adaptation is great, but when you're actually making the level, you kind of don't want that until later, because if you just go ahead and have eye adaptation turned on from the start, you're going to start to have issues where you don't realize how bright the light you placed was because your eye has adapted to it, if you know what I mean. So it's a good idea for you to just go to here and say, hey, turn off the game settings for exposure, and this will force the exposure at a value of 1, okay? Which is just... it keeps it this simple gray, but it's much easier for you to kind of adjust everything. So I strongly recommend kind of using that general kind of workflow, because that way you're just tinkering with the exposure on the camera at the end. You're not setting up the environment lights, and fighting the exposure the whole way through. So you can see we've got some, super rough lights. One thing that my subway kind of thing is going to need is going to be a doorway or like some sort of staircase coming down to it. But I'll do that in just a second. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag a couple of these around. I'm going to set my grid to about 50. By the way, if you use the Photoshop, a little shortcut is you can use the square brackets to just change the grid size. So by using square brackets, notice it's now increments of 50. So that's just a nicer way sometimes, instead of, again, clicking up here, so we can kind of get a much nicer feel going on. Another thing that's really useful, just as a pro tip, sorry, I'm dropping a lot of pro tips on you, instead of showing you the basics here, but it's just it's how my mind thinks. So if I select one of these, so while alt dragging would normally give you this, one really cool thing you can do is you can hold down Shift, and as I drag, it will actually move the camera with the object that I'm dragging around. So you can see here that that's immediately letting me just kind of I don't have to do that awkward thing where I'm dragging the camera, dragging the object, and then dragging the camera, and then dragging the object, and then dragging the camera, and just this constant thing that keeps me regretting my life decisions because it takes so long to get something from one side of the map to the other. The more we can avoid that, the happier we're going to be, right? So That shift drag is just a really useful little thing. I've had someone ask why some of the light bulbs are crossed out. It's because by default, they're all set to a certain type of lighting setup that basically says there can only be 4 overlapping lights that are a certain type of thing called stationary at any one time. I'll get into that a little bit more strongly in just a second. But yeah, in the meantime, let's just quickly drag some of these in. I always get that Spike Lee camera kind of vibe going on anytime I'm dragging them around like that, to be honest. If anyone got that reference, then great. It's only now that I'm realizing it's a little obscure. Okay.
Actually, Chris, while we're on the topic of hot tips, is there a shortcut to place spotlights instead of point lights?
That is a great question. I legit don't know that, actually. You can check it real quick for me in background if you've got an editor running. It's under... You can look at any editor hotkey by just going to Editor Preferences, and then under Keyboard Shortcuts, do a search for the word. No, there's Show Spotlights, but not one to just drag it in. I'm sorry. So yeah, a quick thing, by the way. Honestly, no matter how many shortcuts I teach everybody today, there's going to be a bajillion that I just didn't know about or whatever else. So don't be afraid to just open up the editor preferences, and under keyboard shortcuts, if you find that you're constantly working with something, like let's say I'm always working with actors, I'm just going to type in the word actor, and I can just casually browse every possible shortcut to do with actors and just be happy with. So you know, I can assign extra things. So now everyone's discussing that Spike Lee is not obscure. I meant the camera part of Spike Lee. Anyway, so we've got this going on. We've got ourselves some basic kind of pillar setups. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start getting some exterior lighting and a passageway coming in at this point. So I think a good way to approach that is going to be using another subtractive brush that is going to kind of cut through this part of the geometry. Now, there is already a stairway mesh that I can use. Oh, actually, one thing that I haven't really been doing is, so when all of your assets are here, that's useful. I'm going to turn off the extra stuff because it's hidden by default normally. This is useful. You know, you can just browse through your folder structure, but if you go to filters, you can actually just find filters for anything. So if I need to get everything to do with animation, I can click that, and this will only give me animation style assets. Or if I want to, I could say, hey, I only want static meshes, and that's going to give me 3D meshes that we can kind of put in there. So I can see in this situation that what I really want to be able to do is have a staircase, and I know there's already a staircase mesh that I can just drag and drop into the scene. So I'm just going to use this and place that there.
Should also be known there's a collections functionality. So if you have like a category of collections kind of deal, you can just add them all to that. And it's a quick and easy way to drop them.
That's a great point. So if I wanted to select all of these gates, you can right click and you can add to collection. Why am I not seeing it all of a sudden? You can add them to a collection. I've got to enable it in my view. But you can add them to, there you go, switch to collections view. You can add them to a new collection. So I can create a new local collection and then just be able to say, hey, give me all of the gate meshes and things like that, which is a really useful way to work. So where was I? I was adding a staircase. So again, I'm going to want some geometry that kind of lines up with this. So it's probably a good idea for me to switch into a view mode that's going to be conducive to that. So we can see that the staircase is there. I probably... Yeah, there we go. So I probably want this to be 2 stories. I kind of want this staircase going off. So I'm just going to Alt drag and place it here. By the way, again, if anyone feels like I'm skipping through stuff too quickly, please let me know in the chat, you know, and I'll slow it down a little bit. But I'm kind of just working through stuff at the moment. My best way is to kind of cover as much content as I can and then field questions as we go. So I can see that I put those meshes in, and I want to have some sort of subtractive brush that aligns to that. You know, I can do it the exact same way that I was already doing it before, right? So if I wanted to, I can once again get a box. I'm just going to drag this in. I'm going to pull it over to here. I'm going to set this to be subtractive space. and I'm literally, I'm just going to go into my brush mode, bring you to the roof, and if I get that, I'm going to bring you over to here. So we can see that that's nice and aligned. If I look at it from the top, I can see that that's not aligned. So I'm just going to move the whole thing across. And if we go back to perspective, we now have this kind of coming off. The last little thing I might do is drag this outer wall so that the face kind of meets the side here. So let's just do that real quick. Great, sorted, ship it. So we have ourselves kind of a nice little staircase kind of exiting the region, and I'll configure that a little bit. So this is, like I said, like just a really quick way to kind of block out space. Honestly, this is also brought on from habits, from the fact that like I learned how to map with the build engine mostly. So I personally like using this kind of tool for just blocking out space. Points to anyone in the chat who knows what I'm talking about with the build engine. So what I'm going to do next is I want to have some outdoor lights kind of starting to come into this area, like coming in through here and coming in through here. So back in this Place Actors tab, I'm going to get a directional light, and I'm just going to drag that in. And you'll notice that when I dragged it in, we can see that this is lit up top now. And that's because what I've essentially added is a sun into the world, okay? So the cool thing with that is that since I've added a sun into the world, I can hit spacebar, and if I rotate it, we can now see that that's kind of just projecting an infinite wave of light in whichever direction I choose to. It's at this point that I think it would be kind of cool if this block here was maybe a little better aligned with this wall, so we could get some nice shadows kind of appearing. How much space do I have to work with? I might add one of these here, and then another one of these here. Yeah, that'll be cool. There we go. So we've got some kind of nicer shadow kind of lights going on there. This is here. That works pretty well. Another thing that's worth noting is like this wall is essentially what's casting a shadow. You know, like as the sun shines from this direction, this here is what's casting the shadow. So in theory, the lower the roof is, the more of this kind of space that you could be projecting light from. This is just a general kind of way to approach it. By the way, it's occurred to me that one button that I'm hitting a lot that I haven't described is game mode. So G switches between being able to see all of this stuff and just seeing what it looks like as a game. Okay, so I smash G all the time. If there's one key that's just going to be like disappearing on my keyboard, it's G. And that's because I'm constantly just looking at stuff and getting a feel for how this works and just hitting G. So, you know, I've got this. One other thing that's worth noting here is if you're a really visual person and you're like, I need to see the sun to work with it, a really cool thing that you can do is if I drop in a thing called a sky atmosphere actor. So I've dropped that in. Nothing seems to have changed, right? You're probably like, Chris, why are you wasting your time? But if I go to my world outliner and I look for that directional light that I added before, there's a really groovy little setting called atmosphere fog sunlight. And if I turn that on, it actually automatically creates an atmosphere that is representative of where this is kind of in the world. A really other useful little shortcut is if you hold Control L, this will automatically, as I move my mouse, just move the sun with it. And the sky atmosphere will automatically respond to where this is in the world. In Unreal Engine 4.26, we have a cloud system coming in that will automatically add dynamic clouds and such to the world that look gorgeous and also automatically interact with this light. And that makes me incredibly happy. I wish I could have done it for this webinar, but unfortunately 2.6 is not out yet. You can access it if you want to and get like a really ugly version of main, which isn't entirely stable. Anyway, Control L lets me kind of position the sun, figure out where I want it, and if you're a more visual person and figuring out where the shadows project to just isn't your jam, but being able to just project the sun is, then sometimes Control L is a great way to handle it. Someone said, is it just stylistic change to the key light? So this sky atmosphere is actually based on real world properties. This is something I'll be going into in the next presentation, but you can actually change how it interacts with the atmosphere at an absorption level. There's also just a really nice art direction override, so you can kind of customize and set things up. I can't remember what this was by default. Oh, if you ever don't know a value by default, you can hit the little button next to it and it'll reset to default. Oh, usually. I'm going to delete you because that didn't flick over. Cool. One actually other thing that's just purely for the sake of, hey, this is really cool, is because this represents the atmosphere in a realistic way, watch what happens if I get my camera and I crank up the camera speed and I just zoom upwards. This actually represents the Earth. Like this, it models the sky atmosphere according to surface levels. So if you just move the camera up, you'll end up with a sky atmosphere. Whoop, there we go, a bit quick. You'll end up with an atmosphere that actually properly models everything, which is kind of weird, but I love it. Mostly because it's a gadget, I guess.
So Chris, speaking about atmosphere, how would you add a sun or a moon?
Sun or a moon? I mean, I added a sun. If you wanted to add a moon, though,
An extra one, I should say.
yeah, you could access that if you ever wanted to do a sky dome. If you ever wanted to do a sky dome, you could access the sky dome and do that in the material. I don't have a whole lot of time to go into it, but you could add another directional light that automatically feeds its properties to say, hey, this is where this is what this represents, and do that through a material. Before I go any further, I'm just going to save this map. So just file, save.
Should be known, some people are asking about replays of this recording. The link that you use to get into this will also contain the links to the recorded videos.
So I'm going to, the other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring this surface all the way down to be flush with the top of this exit, just so we get a bit more shadow action kind of coming through. Works pretty well. Kind of want some of that there. Looks all right. I might angle it a bit. Yeah, let's go with that. Cool. So we've got that basic setup kind of going. We have some really simple lighting kind of coming in. It's at this point that I want to actually start having a better idea of what this looks like when bounce lighting starts coming into play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just hit the build button. So I'm going to go build, and we'll give this just a second to complete. And that, so whenever you build lighting, this is something that's only required when you're doing static lighting, but essentially it's running through and just looking at where all the lights are and correctly bouncing light around the environment. It can take a minute or two. It depends on the quality of your environment. But you can see now that, notice the lighting in the area is much smoother because it's kind of bounced a lot of it's bounced that light around the environment to kind of have a much more accurate representation of everything. Okay, cool. So I've got these things going on. It's now time for me to just really quickly work on just some, I think I might do some decoration, and then I'll start working on some lighting. So what I might do here is we have some of these posters that are floating around, and I know it's the Unreal logo, so this seems like flagrant self-promotion, but that's okay. So I'm just going to drag you onto the wall. If you missed it earlier, the key that I keep smashing here is spacebar. Spacebar will flick your gizmo between translation, rotation, and scale. So if I have scale selected, I can be like, big poster. If I hit spacebar here, we're at translation and rotation. So we've got this on the wall, and I'm just going to alt drag it a few times. I know it's a lot of the same poster. We'll fix it. Fix it in post, I guess you could say. dragging this onto the wall, setting things up. Kind of want one of these. Give it one of these. We eventually want some unnecessary pillars here because they look cool. So let's get some of this happening. Great. So because of those pillars. Now, one thing that's really useful if you're kind of mapping like this is if I look at this world, and I can kind of see, if I look at this world and I can see that it's going to be roughly the same object in different places, I've got a few ways that I can approach certain problems. For instance, if I was to right-click on these, I can actually go down to transform and say, hey, mirror it on the x-axis, and it will flip it. Now, for a poster, that's bad, because we end up with lay renew engine. So, you might not want to do that. But, you can mirror certain things on certain assets. Someone asked about graffiti on the wall. I'll do that in a little bit. That's a great idea. Cool. We've got a couple of posters in play. Now, the reason I pasted the same poster everywhere is I can just control-click on, say, those ones, and they're all selected over here now. And the cool part is if I just select any other poster, say this kind of gnarly looking thing, and hit use asset from content browser, it'll just swap them out with my new one. So I'm just going to go through now and just correct a lot of what we just saw. Swap it out with some other things. This looking thing. Great. Cool. I want to get maybe a couple more unnecessary posters. I really wish this said Epic Mega Games, just to really go the whole 9 yards. I'll throw in a Paragon just so I can feel sad. And that should do it for the minute on those. I'm just gonna alt drag. Oh yeah, actually another little shortcut that you may be interested in that's kind of cool is if you hold Control. Now, if you find clicking on these to be a little bit fiddly, and you're not a great, that's problematic for you, if you hold down Control and hold left click, it will move along the x-axis. If you hold Control and hold right click, it'll move along the y-axis. And Control both clicks will move it up and down. So you don't actually even have to click on the gizmo. You can just kind of just throw these into play. Again, it's kind of like one of those pro tips. But it is really useful when you're a mapper. Oh, we're not meant to say mapper anymore. What do you say now? Level designer. I missed the term mapper. Cool. Put those in. Great. I'm putting in just a bunch of these things because I just wanted some decorations on the wall. If I wanted to do other stuff as well, if you want to kind of I'm trying to think how to phrase this. If you want to do like a lot of something, let's say that we're looking at this scene and we're like, man, I sure wish I could fill up one corner of the room with garbage bags. I know the obvious thing is like, well, I guess I'm going to select a garbage bag and I'm just going to put that there, and then I'm going to alt, and then I'm going to alt, and whatever else. That's kind of that would be very time consuming. So if you're going to do something like that, I would suggest instead going to the foliage mode. And I know we're treating this as garbage foliage, but hey, it's 2020. So I'm going to get a trash bag, and I'm going to drag this into foliage. And you'll notice that this now gives me like a little painter brush. This can just be really useful because you can actually just click on the foliage and set rules like, hey, I want this to be this dense. And I want to set the minimum radius between garbage bags to be 20. I want the scale to be between 0.75 and 1.1, and then I can just be like, blah, and just kind of paint them in without really, I'm just painting in garbage. But I can then just kind of paint those things straight into the scene, which can be just a useful way of adding stuff if you kind of, and you can use shift click to remove them. So I could be like, garbage. And then when I realize I've just gone way too far, I'll be like, okay, less garbage. If you end up with 3, obviously that's no longer a good idea, but you know, if we were to pretend that this area was closed off because they had garbage issues, we could comfortably just drop in some of those things. If you want to work with them in foliage mode, you can also then be like selection, click on any of them individually. There's a bunch of other things that you can do here, but this is, it's just really useful for when you're like, I need to pollute this place, and you can just do it. Also, please don't let that be the box quote for this workshop. Okay, so the next thing, someone said, can you paint any model? Actually, not only can you paint any model, you can paint any actor. So one of the really cool things is you could actually paint in bad guys if you wanted to. So like paint in enemies into an area, which is really cool because the foliage mode supports all sorts of stuff. Like it supports aligning to surfaces and things like that. So someone asked, when was the foliage tool introduced? It was introduced in Unreal Engine 3. I can't remember what version of UE3, but it's been there a little while. So we've got that going on. We can see that we've painted in some garbage. We've got some general things going on. I would like this to, okay, let's work on some pipes. So again, you know, if I wanted to start getting some of these pipes going on, I could just drag this into the world, okay? And when I drag this into the world, we can see that we've got this, and I'm going to rotate it so we're facing 90 degrees. And I'm also going to get the next part as this mesh. And I'm actually going to clone this and then just swap the mesh over. I just personally find that workflow is pretty quick. So you can see here that we've got the mesh. Now, it's times like this where you may want to consider like how you're approaching the rest of this pipe. Okay. Now, the obvious way to go about what we're doing here is you could be like, well, you know, if I wanted to, I could scale the pipe up and then every now and then add a joint. I guess I should have scaled that further. You know, so you could kind of work like that, and that would be fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with doing that. You know, we've got ourselves a pipe. But what I would personally suggest is, first off, if you're going to always be treating this pipe as one actor, if you press Control G, that will group them. So you'll notice that every time I select that, any piece of this, it's now selecting the whole actor. That's because they're grouped together. I think it is Shift G to break the group. Yeah, it is. Control G. And if you want to turn off group selection, you can hit Control Shift G. And if you're like, dude, that was way too many shortcuts at one time, that's totally fair. So if you have that kind of situation going, you can just go up to settings and you'll see allow group selection, or you could right click and go to groups and you can see group. Okay. So yeah, I'm just going to drag some pipes around and, you know, this works all right. Okay. You know, we've got some pipes and that's, I guess, kind of cool. But what if we wanted like a weirdo pipe? Okay. That's the technical term for anyone in the pipe business. So if we want a weird looking pipe that, say, it needs a bend of it in some kind, it's a good idea for us to start looking at a thing called spline meshes. And because of that, let's go ahead and approach the problem of of a bendy pipe. So I'm going to go to my content browser and I'm going to create a new folder called Blueprints. Now, here's where I get to introduce you here's how I get to introduce you to Blueprints. Blueprint is Unreal Engine's scripting language, and I don't want anyone to be scared out of that, because blueprints are made to be super accessible and they're made to be used by anyone on the team. I cannot stress this enough. Blueprints are not just for programmers. So, watch what happens when I make one. If I go to Blueprint, I can now create anything that I want. And now anything that's placed in the world is referred to as an actor. Okay? And I'm going to call this BP pipe. BP spline pipe? And when I open that up, we're greeted with this. Okay? Now, what's cool here is that if I was to go add component and add a spline, you can see here that we're able to actually add a spline to this object, okay? Now, the reason I like doing this is, watch this. So I'm gonna drop this in the world, and you can see here that we've got a spline, okay? Now, the cool thing is if I hold down Alt and I drag it, you can see here that this spline is, it's actually bending its way around to whatever I need, okay? So that's kind of cool. But what am I doing with this? Well, when a blueprint runs, it runs code. So how it works is this. Construction scripts is the code that gets executed when something gets brought into the engine. Brought into the world. Event graphs are things that get run while the game is running. So if in my construction script, I looked at this spline, what's cool about this is I can add extra stuff via script. So imagine for a second, I wanted to add a static mesh component. I'm just going to add an arbitrary static mesh component, which will be a pipe mesh, wherever it may be. So just for the sake of this, I'm going to add a hallway pipe. When I add it, you can see that that got added. But the cool thing is in code, we could look stuff up, right? So what if I was to say, hey, I want to add a pipe at every single point. So if I was to say, hey, to the spline, how many segments do you have? Get the number of segments. I could then say, at every single segment, so from 0 until the last segment, I want you to get location at a spline point. And if I plug this in, I want you to watch what happens. It's now added a pipe piece to every single point. Okay? Now the cool part of this is, you're probably like, that's great and all, dude, but now your pipes are all facing that way. GG. But what if we abandoned this bit for a second, and instead, this time we added a spline mesh component that again is going to be the pipe, which I hope is still selected. And this time, what we said is we had set, start, and end. It wants to know a start position and an end position, and a start tangent and an end tangent. And again, the cool thing here that we can do is we can call get tangent at spline point, or get location at spline point. And what I can actually tell it is like, hey, at the current point, I want to add a pipe. And I actually want to look at the next point, so I'm just going to add one. And gonna do the same. Now if you're like, oh, that's starting to look like spaghetti, that's fine. That's super easy to fix. You just double click to add reroute nodes. Double click. I'm just gonna move this around. Also, if you highlight nodes and hit Q, it'll straighten them out. I'm gonna say end and end. Now what's really cool about what we just did is if I was to say, hey, I don't want you to do this for the last point, because, you know, we're connecting something to it. And I looked back at the thing, that's actually now going to be running the pipes along the mesh. Give it just a second for the shaders to compile for the first time. But you see how, like, what's going on here is I'm able to just kind of drag this. I'm going to turn off grid snapping. I'm now able to just kind of bring this in. Now, someone asked in the chat, "Hey, wouldn't it be better to add points?" And you're totally right. That would be a great thing for us to do, and that's super easy to do. So, again, just for the record, today's lesson is not about teaching Blueprint. We're going to have a scripting lesson later on. So that's where I'm going to more slowly and more thoroughly step through Blueprint. I just want you right now to understand what is doable and why Blueprint is powerful, okay? So anyway, you know, if I was to go to this thing, I could also say, you know, after you added every spline mesh, I also want you to add a static mesh. Someone suggested adding a joint. I think that's a great idea. So let's just add this thing. And it's going to say where. And once again, I'm going to say, actually, I just want to add it at that location. So I'm kind of just throwing this in really quickly, but now it's actually adding joints at every pipe point. And if this pipe had more vertices, it would correctly bend along the spline. Unfortunately, this pipe is very low vert. But see, now that's automatically just going to add... Oops, I should have set the rotation as well. That was a good trick. So I want to get the location, and I want to get the rotation. There you go. So now it's actually bending those according to which way the spline is facing at that time. So hopefully you can kind of see, like, could you have made this in Maya or Max or whatever? Yeah, for sure. But if you smash this out yourself really quickly, like being able to put these tools together quickly is just, your workflow is incredible because your workflow is just going to be incredible because you can just build tools for yourself. Someone pointed out it's an OHS issue. Correct. This is a major OHS issue. But really, just like the notion of building your own tools, just, it's so useful. The number of times I've seen artists just like wasting time on stuff that, you know, it would have taken a programmer a couple of hours to look at, but, you know, the programmers are snowed under. They just didn't have time, et cetera, et cetera. So it's unfortunate, but, you know, sometimes you just get stuck, right? Someone asked if you could scale the pipe. Yeah, you can. But like I said, you know, sometimes programmers just get burdened and they're just not going to be able to make tools. But if you spend, you know, just a couple of minutes on something like this, you can really just build the right tools for the type of game you're making. And I think that's just so wonderful, personally. And that's why, like, that's why we're doing an entire lesson on Blueprint, despite this whole session being a you know, more about film and TV. It's because it's not just for programmers. Okay. Anyway, so we've got our pipe in there. It's time for us to start adding some other kind of details to the world. I'm just going to quickly drop in a couple of gates because that would look good. If anyone, again, if you have questions, please feel free to keep hitting the chat. This is going to sound silly, but I don't have my phone on me and don't know what time it is. How far into the session are we now, Alex?
Ooh, we're about 1 hour.
Great, so I've still got time. Okay, so, you know, we're going to add this gate in here. Once again, just because I know that this is probably going to have something that's meant to be in it. There's a gate. So I'm just going to swap those out. One thing that I haven't actually touched on that's really useful is you can also attach meshes to other meshes. So if I always want this gate to be attached to this thing, I can actually just select the gate and hit Control A. Oh, no, it's not Control A. It is, Alt A, sorry. Alt A, and that actually allows me to just click on something and it will now be attached to that. So if I was to then move the other object, it'll now just move both of them. This is similar to grouping, but it's kind of more of a hierarchical thing. So I've got that attached. I'm going to add some sort of generic locking looking thing. Snaps are great. That does not look wonderful. We can fix this. It's okay. It's gonna be alright. There we go. Throw some pillows at it. Fixed. Art. Let's go ahead and get some more interesting lines coming through here. That's going to be a big one. I'm just going to be real sneaky and paint in a cheeky little gate, which will now pretend to be a cross looking thing. Don't judge me. Sorry. And I'm just going to scale this up. I wonder how this is going to look. It's dropping the scale grid size. I think this might be possible. No one has to know, except for everyone in the street. Cool. I'm just putting this in there as a. Oh, that was terrible. Let's not do that one. Just putting that in there as there's some general just grading because I want to start getting some interesting shadows going. Great. Don't judge me. Okay, cool. So we've got that going. It's worth noting that at this point, one thing that's really useful is starting to assess how your directional lights are going to work with, shadow casting something like this. So I'm just going to quickly save and then click build again. Someone said that they missed the hotkey for switching views. It's holding down control and then dragging the middle mouse button. It's a weird one. Someone said, can't you stretch it along one axis? You can. You just only click on the axes if you want to stretch it along that one. I just try and keep things close on the same axes for as long as I can. Someone said, so do we skip static lights and light map creation in UE5? I mean, UE5's got Lumen. It depends on what you're making something for, right? Great. So we've got this kind of coming in. Give it just a second for the. There you go. The engine catches up. Now you'll notice that looks terrible. Okay, and the reason that looks terrible is because this is coming in and it's shining its light, but by default the light maps from the sun are told to be pretty low quality. What you can actually do though is if I was to select the directional light, Unreal has a feature built into it called cascaded shadow maps. And what they essentially do is when it casts a shadow, within a certain distance, it will cast a dynamic shadow instead of a baked one. So if I set this to say 2000, you can now see that that's casting a nice crisp dynamic shadow. And as I move really far away, it fades into the static. I'm getting too far away here. There you go. So you can see that it starts to fade into the static light map when we're really far away. But that kind of just starts to create some of these nicer lines that we're going to have on the scene. And because of that, I think this is probably a good point for me to start. Doing the lighting for the rest of the world. So we're going to start focusing on lighting from this point in because I still want to make sure that everyone has time to go through the ray tracing section with Alex towards the end. Don't want to steal his thunder. So let's go ahead and let's get some of this lighting going on. Actually, you know what? Just before we do lighting, I'm going to quickly bring in a couple of extra things. I would like to have a puddle on the ground, just because puddles look cool, and I think that'll help me with my lighting as well. It'll look a little bit nicer. Now, you know what? I'm going to light it, then puddle it. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to remove lights and work out where I want to have them all, like spatially. We could keep the work lights in there if we want. It's up to you whether you want to do something like that. I personally like to, when I go to actually light an environment, just ditch everything and then go from there. But for the sake of actually keeping things coherent, maybe it's a good idea to do one at a time. So I'm going to delete that and just this first couple of rooms. Okay. Now we've still got this light coming in from on high. And I'm going to delete these. Now it's worth noting that we could light this with we could light this in a few different ways. You know, we could be bringing in spotlights to have something like this. We could be bringing in point lights like you saw already. I personally, when I'm lighting an environment like this, if I'm the one that is both building the environment and lighting the environment, I wouldn't mind just making a blueprint that its job is to be very simple, but its job is to just be the light and the mesh that it's attached to, just because that way I know they're always going to be stuck together. So I'm going to call this BP ceiling light. And I'm just going to add a static mesh. And I think we have, let's have a quick browse through the meshes that we've got. By the way, control mouse wheel will increase or decrease the size of these. There we go. Let's get this this fluorescent light that's hanging from the ceiling. It's great. And I'm gonna grab a I'm gonna use something that is not usually used too often in games called a rect light. And all we're going to do with this rect light is we're going to kind of put this beneath what we have there. And I'm going to change the barn door angle. Just kind of scaling this up. Great. That'll probably do it. All right, so I'm just setting this up as a reasonably simple light, and I want the attenuation radius to not be particularly huge. You know, it's really just a spot around the area that we're in. I suspect the value of 400 is going to be nice. And the cool thing is we can now see that ceiling light is actually just in our place actors. And what we're going to be doing is just adding a couple of these into the scene. So let's try and find some spots where these could feel reasonably nice. Now, here's the thing. If I was to go about lighting this environment and I was like, hey, you know, wouldn't it be great if I was to try and light this environment and I was like, hey, wouldn't it be great if, you know, these had tight controls? The way to actually do it, there's a few different ways to do it. I could select a light like this one, and I could manually go through and select the rect light and then change the values as we see fit here. But what I personally like to do is bring in a couple of manual controls, because, you know, I could get this right now and just immediately be like, I want this light to be this weirdo, browny, disgusting looking color to set the scene. And I could just move on with my life, and that's fine. That component has been overridden to have these values, right? But what I would personally prefer to do in a situation like this is I would like to go to my ceiling light, and just in the construction scripts, I'd like to just give myself a couple of cleaner controls that I know I'm going to need. And this will make sense in a moment. It's because if I was to go to if I was to look at this light, notice that the mesh doesn't care about the light. Like, I turn that brightness up, turn it off, and that is permanently this ugly green kind of color. Do you see that? I would love to make it so that the light and the mesh both use the same information. Okay? So what I'm going to be doing in this situation is I'm going to open up my ceiling light mesh, wherever it may be. And inside my ceiling light mesh, I can see that there's actually a material called emissive that is just these bits. And if I was to take a peek at the material for that, I can see that it actually just has a parameter called emissive color that sets, like that emissive color just sets the final color that we would have there. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I've got these, and I'm just going to overwrite on the static mesh. I'm going to go set vector parameter. And the vector parameter that I'm going to overwrite is the one called emissive color. Oh, no, they spell color like Americans. There we go. Okay. And I'm also, at the same time, going to set the light color on the rect light. And watch what we get here. So I'm setting this, and I'm going to be setting this. I'm going to right click on this color and say promote to variable, and I'm going to call this light color. Okay, we're almost there. Sorry, folks. I'm going to click on this little thing and watch what we get. Now, I know I just kind of blinded a few people with science. I'll step back in just a bit. But by doing it this way, I'm able to click on any of these and say, this is the color of the light, but why are we not seeing that? Sorry, folks. Give me just a second. I'll work out what just happened. Ah, I see what happened. Yeah, okay. I want to call set. This is correct. This is taking my 3 back. Sorry, folks. Just having a quick look at what I've done wrong. Ah, it's because this cares about having an alpha value. I'm just going to bypass that for now. Sorry about that, folks. It seems like I've set something wrong. Set the vector parameter on this to be this. This is correct. Oh, that is, what? That is working. Okay, I don't know what I did differently, but now everything is working. Let's all back away slowly. Great. Cool, so the advantage of this is, see these light globes up top? If I see what I did. If I was to select this, they will now automatically reflect the light color changes so that they kind of more tonally match it. And the cool thing is you know, we can get some boost out of the actor itself as well. So if I wanted to just multiply the thing going into the mesh, let's say I wanted to times it by a value like 10. And I make this exposed. By the way, this eyeball button, if that's not checked, you'll notice that my ceiling light only has the light color value. But if I go back to here and turn it on, now there's an emissive boost value that we can see getting switched. I'll do it on this one, sorry. So now I can say emissive boost and kind of get like a mega glow out of it if I want to. Yeah, my apologies. For anyone that was wondering why that was not working before, it's because instead of changing the variable that I created, I was actually setting the light color directly through here. So that's what the mistake was that I was making. But the advantage of doing this, like I said, is, you know, we can comfortably just grab bits. I can look through a lot of the lights that we've got, and I can more comfortably start to kind of work with this space and say, hey, you know, over here, let's get this one to be a slider white, just so it's a slight feature light. And I'll move them across. Now, this is generally going to start to feel, you know, a little bit nicer. The things that you need to be aware of are, by default, these lights that I'm adding to the scene are movable. So right now, these lights that I'm adding to the scene are not, they're not going to be baked in. So what's actually going on is they're not being baked in, they're just fully dynamic lights that are being brought around. And most of the time that's okay in a lot of situations. But if we're trying to get overall quality, one way to go about doing that is back here. If I set these to be stationary, that will now be a light that is, it's going to properly bake out its shadow maps and such as we go. Someone asked, could you make them flicker? Yeah, you can make them flicker really easily, but I am unfortunately running kind of low on time, so I'm becoming increasingly paranoid that we're not going to get through all the content that I hoped we would. So I'm just going to drag, actually it's kind of nice barely having that in the scene. Cool. So you can see here that we've got ourselves something reasonably basic, and I'm just going to click build. Sorry about this, folks. I just want to make sure that we've still got time for the ray tracing at the end. Give it a minute. Great, so that's probably kind of building in. We can see the shadows kind of being cast now. Things are starting to look a little bit nicer. Very dark, I know. We've gone down that route. So the next thing that I want to do while we've still got some time is I would like to add some unnecessary fog. So I'm going to drag in an exponential height fog. Now if I was to drag that in before, after, so you can see it's added just like fog in the distance. But one of the useful things that you can do with height fog in this engine is you can actually enable a setting called volumetric. Now, if we were to look at what that actually looks like on the settings, what I want you to do is see this light that's kind of coming through here. If I increase the extinction scale, notice we're kind of automatically getting a bit of volumetrics kind of kicking in here. So it's actually, might be a little bit tricky to see on a stream. So I'm going to turn it up to a ridiculous amount. But can you see that? Is that coming through all right on the stream? So you should be able to see. Great. So you should be able to see that's kind of coming through. We're getting this nice kind of soft glow coming beneath some of these lights as well, which is great. So this is just really cheeky. I know it's going to work for this environment pretty well. It's worth noting that out here is going to be super foggy, but no one's going to know that because the scene's in here. So we can see that we've started to kind of get some of that feel in. But the next thing that I want to step through is decals. Okay. So if I wanted to get like some interesting stuff going on the floor, I would often want to just project decals and cracks and things like that. One of the really great ways to do that is, one second, I need to open up the right tool, and I don't want to show you everything in my start menu. Professional. There we go. Okay, so this is Quixel Bridge. This is Quixel Bridge. Quixel Bridge is a tool that is completely free for all Unreal Engine users, and here's how it works. Let's say in my game I wanted to have, I'm suddenly unable to think of something. I don't know, train. Anything to do with trains, we can now see that assets are just coming up. Right? Let's say I wanted to have something to do with Iceland. Enter. And we can now see that these assets are all coming up. Now here's the cool thing. Every single thing that's popping up here, if you're an Unreal Engine user, all 13,000 assets and growing are completely free for you to use. It's completely free, they're fully scanned, they're completely textured, they're photogrammetry assets. This team is just all around the world at all times, just taking scans of things and making them virtual. And you can kind of, sorry, I said game, I'm being corrected. You're correct. Film. Uh, real-time environment. So you can just use these, right? And I, the as long as you're like as long as you have the Unreal Engine account, then you're free to use them within Unreal Engine projects. Now, in this case, what I actually want to find is let's say that I wanted to find some cracks. I wanted to find some decals and stuff that I could project into the world. I've got a bunch of textures here. I've actually gone ahead. They're listed under purchased, but I purchased them for $0. I'm gonna get decals. So I can see here that I've already got a couple of these that are downloaded, and I'm just gonna grab this asphalt crack. Okay. Now this asphalt crack is just this crack here that we can see. And what I'm actually going to do is literally just go, all right, export settings. I want it to be a 2K texture. I want to put it into Unreal Engine. It's a 4.25. It's going to say which project, and I'm going to tell it to put it into the sequencer workshop. And with that selected, I then just click export. Yes, there is a way to color grade in Engine. It's worth noting as well that this is Quixel Bridge, but you can also push this into Quixel Mixer, which allows you to like basically just paint things. Cool. So you can see here that that's actually imported it. It's automatically generated a material for me. And here's where the cool part is. If I drag in a decal, this is a projection that just projects that onto the surface. And I can alt drag this around. And now by default, it's going to project this entire box. Now the problem with that is that if I was to do this, things would look bad. Okay, so yep. However, to fix that is pretty simple. I just need to drop the size on that axis down a bit. So now we're able to kind of get a bunch of these and kind of just pretty up, well, the opposite of prettying up, I guess. But see how like we're just immediately adding some character to the environment, you know, and I can grab these and I can kind of scale them as I see fit. I'm just doing stuff here. And of course, you know, nothing stops me from getting one of these cracks and maybe projecting it sideways, you know. So if I wanted this to be, once again, I'll go really tight so we don't project onto the pipes too. But there we go. So see how we're just immediately kind of starting to just have a bit of character going on with some of the stuff that we're working with. This is really useful for just kind of just really quickly going through and just adding character to the world, adding just. In this, I was about to say tiny imperfections, but let's be real, these are like giant imperfections. At the moment, this is still taking in some of the cracks and such from the lighting, and it's because by default, the decal type that it created is using a different decal to what I would like. So if I open up the material that it's got, by default, it's a the blend mode is set to translucent, and if I set it to be debuffer decal, translucent, normal, and roughness, so I'm just changing this blend mode type. That should fix some of that stuff that was coming through. But you can use decals for all sorts of stuff, you know, like I could have been doing the posters on the wall as decals. I could be doing the, what do you call it, on the ground, like a, I guess like a manhole cover on the ground. Oops, that was projecting the cracks, but not the, that actually looks kind of cool too. Sorry about that. I did that as translucent and normal, not color, normal, and roughness. There we go. But yeah, you can actually just project normals onto it, or just project a roughness change as well. So you can have different types of decals controlling different things. It's really quite powerful. And I'm going to just create one last decal before we kind of move into the final part, which is post-processing. Yeah, there you go. So that's no longer taking the normal from the surface. It's once it comes in, it's pretty aggressively kind of coming in. Great. So the next thing that you may want to do is you may want to make your own decals for various reasons. And if you wanted to do something that was yourself, I'm just going to create the world's simplest decal. So I'm going to call this m_puddle. For anyone that missed it, this was a material. And m_puddle, I'm going to set the domain to be a decal. And I'm going to tell it that I want it to be the color, normal, and roughness. And this is going to be reasonably simple. I'm going to have one parameter called color. Sorry, I just added that with a hotkey out of habit. I'm going to create a vector parameter, which is what you use to add color values that can change. You can also hold V to just add them. And I'm going to call this color. And I'm just plugging this straight in. The next thing I'm going to do is, I know that because this is water, I don't want any ripples in this version, so I'm just going to set the normal to be upwards, which is going to set to a value of 1. And finally, I'm going to set the roughness to be a value of just something very low, like 0.1. So not a very rough surface at all. The hotkey for the vector parameter is holding down V. Oh, sorry, I didn't set this to translucent. What a noob. All right, so I've grabbed these and I've got my puddle. And once again, I'm going to drag a decal into the scene. And we'll just give it just a second. This is going to look really weird, by the way. I want you to know that I'm breaking this intentionally. And you can see here, this is now adding a square of water. So everyone, my map is too dark. I'm just going to... Oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention before is if you want to turn off the volumetric scattering on a light, every single light has this volumetric in-scattering intensity. So I could be like, hey, this one has huge amounts of in-scattering. Or it could be like, this light does not in any way contribute to in-scattering. Up to you how you want to handle it. Now, I can see that this has added my black square of doom that has a reflective surface. So we can see that that's getting screen space reflections. What I would like to do here is I would like to apply a texture to this puddle so that it's not just pure black. And applying a texture is actually relatively easy. All you need to do is drag in a texture. I'm just going to do a search for an arbitrary noise texture, something that could work. Sure, why not? And I'm just going to plug this texture into the opacity channel. All right, so this is going to look strange again, but this is going to be closer to what we want in the end. So you can now see it's starting to apply these puddles like this. So see how we're starting to kind of get this shine kind of coming through in certain spots? Now, the final thing that I would like to do for something like this is there's a nice little thing that you can get called a radial gradient. And if I preview that, you'll see what it is. A radial gradient is literally a black to white gradient. And the cool thing is that if I was to subtract the mask from the gradient, it's actually going to kind of give me that. Do you see that look? And what's really great about that is, you know, if I was to increase the value of that gradient before it comes in, like let's say I was to set it to a value of 2 or something, we now only get these kind of cracks happening at the edges. And the last thing I'm going to do is clamp it. so it doesn't go above 1 or below 0. Again, like, my apologies if this is kind of throwing some people in the deep end. I'm more than happy to help folks out with some follow-up on this, but hopefully you can see what's going on here. And the final thing, you know, let's just look at what that looks like in the world. Give it just a second. Great. And now we're able to, wherever we want, put in some puddles. And those puddles are going to have this nice little reflection going on inside the scene. So these decals are really useful. You know, like, we can just quickly get some kind of screen space reflections going on. Things look reasonably nice. Since there's a lot of film folks here, oh, actually, I'm going to crunch that down so that it's not as... There we go. So we can now see that we've... Look at that. These pipes have water around them. Hashtag storytelling. All right, so we've kind of got this in there. One thing that I actually like to do that is definitely advanced, but I'm going to show you anyway, is this texture is just a standard texture, right? But if you want to UV it so that its UVs are based on the world position, and I type in the world correctly, there's a great node called World Position XY, which actually just gets these UVs and projects them according to the world position of the decal. And you can see here that it only projects them on one axis. So see, we have nice tiling here, but no tiling here. The reason I like to do that is now the cracks will stay in the same place. Give it just a second. So see, okay, that was way too big of a start value, but the cool thing is that notice that as I drag two puddles together, it's actually kind of now stacking their opacities on top of one another, which means they can more comfortably kind of touch and fill out an area. The last little thing that I'm going to show you before we switch over to Alex, because I do still want to go through some resources and stuff before the final presentation. I'm just going to drop this value. The last thing that I would like to show everyone beforehand is, at the end of this, is I would like to go into a feature called SSGI. So SSGI is called Screen Space Global Illumination. Some people call it SSGI, some people call it Screen Space Global Illumination, and some people call it magic. I'm one of the latter. It's basically what it does is it looks at any lights in the scene and it creates a global illumination based off of any light sources that you can see inside the scene, which just does create a slightly nicer overall effect. And to do that, you literally just go to your project settings and you turn it on. I'm just going to save this. Actually, I'll build the lighting first, just before I do show you SSGI. Give this just a second. Any questions while I'm building that?
Yeah, there's a question. Is there any way to see the progress of the light baking? I can see it takes
Yeah,
a while.
it's in the bottom right, building lighting. You can also launch Swarm, but I'm not going to Alt-Tab through my desktop right now. Oh, and we got our first crash. That was a good job. One sec, I'm just flicking this over to this. Well, like, quick recovery. I wonder what killed it. Sorry, folks. Any other questions just while I quickly restart the project?
Not quite yet. However, people were asking how to do flickering lights.
Flickering lights are they're super easy to add. I probably don't have time to go into it, but in Blueprint you can set what they're doing. There it is. So anytime anytime the engine crashes, it'll give you this pop-up. Just select all of them and say, hey, restore, and it'll do its best to restore all of those things. this was not my scene. There you go. So we're back where we started. I'm not sure why that crashed. I guess I'll just do another build and hope that it works. Cool. Now, any other questions to... Actually, no, while this is building lighting, I can just keep working on the map. It'll just be a little laggy, but that's okay. What I might do is I might drag a post-process volume into the world. Now, if you think about what we're seeing right now, what we're seeing is the world as it actually is, right? Like it's just the lights, it's everything being set as default values, etc., etc. But post-processing, when we drag it in, creates this box. Now I want you to watch what happens if I get a value on this box. Let's say we wanted to color grade. Actually, no, I'll do bloom. That's the easiest one. I'm gonna change the bloom values to 8. Now, normal, but when I go inside the box, it's now going to be overriding my visual settings. So you see how those lights, I'm going to turn this to a ridiculous number. Outside the box, inside the box. We're on the one side, we're on the other side. So what this actually does is this overrides the current view settings. And we can kind of set this up for all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. I mean, like I mentioned exposure before. We could, oh, I gotta set this back to game settings now. Now we're in that point before that I mentioned where you don't want to fight exposure. I'm just setting up some base values. So this is actually, let's just kind of like tweak how everything should be. We can kind of start setting up the scene, but we could also kind of add some atmosphere to it. I could add dirt mask, for instance, which is kind of cool. So dirt mask is, if I wanted to make it look like there's stuff on the lens, none of these are alpha textures, but there is one inside of the engine. So just type in dirt. I'm going to turn that up to a ridiculous intensity so you can see it. So see there's this dirt on the screen here. That will be more visible when you look into lights. You'll just see slight artifacts kind of coming in. It might be a bit tricky to see on the stream. So, we can kind of set this up. But the cool thing is you can kind of set this up for different rooms in different situations too. So if I wanted to, I can kind of like stack them and layer them. And you can also, and this is really useful, there's a setting on them that is called unbound, or infinite extent now. And if I turn that on, it will now apply this to me anywhere I am inside of the world. So this kind of acts as the default base layer of post-processing. And what that means is like as I kind of move through the world, it's still going to stay the same. But if I wanted to, I could now have another one that has override values. So this one here has a priority of 2. And let's say inside of this one, I want to have, what's something that would look really strange? Let's say I, for some reason, wanted to mess with the offset of we wanted to get that kind of like weirdo sepia look. Okay. Now when I've got this one, oops, I forgot to turn unbound off. So now when I'm in this one, but when I go into that, it now switches. So see how we're actually like working with the different settings of the two of them. And this is a nice way that for us to have what do you call it? To have like underwater sections or gas sections, or you maybe want to have post-processing settings and bloom values that are really good for downstairs, but when the camera goes up above, we then want to kind of tweak different stuff. You know what I mean? So kind of having that set up in general is really, really important, and we can really create a nice feel for a lot of things through this stuff, because it does have a ton of features in there. If you're willing to destroy your GPU a bit. We don't use this in games, but you can use it in film and TV. There is convolution bloom, which looks really, really pretty, but it does take a pretty big performance hit normally. Oh, I just realized that I didn't actually turn on SSGI because we had the crash. Here's how it works. So that's it off, and that's it on. Now, some of you may not see that difference. Off, on, off, on. So this kind of calculates nicer bounce lighting based on what it sees inside the scene. This has a really prominent effect if you have a colorful object in the scene. Unfortunately, I've now gone with this very grayscale brownie environment, but SSGI is definitely worth turning on. Sorry about that, folks. I'll make sure I focus on that properly in the repeat session. But yeah, like I said, so kind of stepping through a lot of the settings that are here, there's a lot you can do. One of the coolest things you have is this post-process material section, which allows you to actually run the current screen through a material, and you might want to do your outline effects and things like that, and then override them so you get this kind of like nice, cool, cartoony value or something like that. Someone asked if they could see a big red square for the SSGI. Yeah, let's do that. Just going to quickly red sphere. So if I was to get something like this, it's picking up the cracks. So if I was to get something like this, and we were to have a light up here, this could be too subtle. This might even be more apparent if I switch this to be emissive red instead. Cool. So I've got that in. And if I was to toggle it off and on, I think that's gonna... We're getting that projecting back onto it. It's one of those things that you don't really notice it until you turn it on, and then you're like, oh, that's much nicer. Cool. So this is it for the really basic setup stuff that I kind of wanted to run through. I know I went through a lot of content today, and like I was going through it pretty quickly. I'm going to switch over to this. There we go. I know I went through a lot of content today, and I've gone through it pretty quickly, and it's because we are running this repeat session. So if you're able to ask questions in between, you're more than welcome to email me and ask stuff. I'm going to warn you though, due to the second mail out last night, my email is currently flooded, so it may take me a day or two to really get through all the responses. But hopefully people are starting to see how some of these earlier settings could be kind of put together, how these things could work. The outdoor environment session that we're doing later today will hopefully clarify a lot of this, and feel free to semi-ambush me with some questions that you've thought about when we get into that outdoor session. I'm gonna switch over to Alex now. Alex, you still around?
Yes, I am.
Cool. All right. I'm going to switch over to Alex now. And what we're going to do is he's going to run you through just some of the settings for anyone that is in the audience that wants to set up ray tracing and they want to see like how some of these things affect the final visual quality and what we can see. While he's showing you stuff, I'll be in the chat and doing my best to kind of answer some questions in that space. So here's where I switch over. One moment. Sorry, folks, I'm not used to using OBS. I am an Unreal evangelist and not an OBS evangelist. Here we go. Look at that. Scroll across. All right, that should be coming through. Awesome.
Hey guys, I'm Alex. I'm one of the other evangelists here. Probably heard my voice in this little session so far that Chris has provided. I'm going to go through a bit of the ray tracing functionality that are in the engine, and it's actually quite easy to start this up. I'll start sharing my screen. So bear with me for 1 second. Now, you can pull that up, Chris.
I thought I could. It's not.
Should you just click on it?
Yep. There we
Beautiful.
go. I can computer.
Cool. So this is actually a demo scene that is in the Loan tab of the engine. So if you like, you can go to the Epic Games launcher, and there's this fantastic Loan tab that Chris mentioned yesterday in the other stream. And it has a ton of content that contains stuff like Chaos Destruction, Digital Humans, good old Mike Seymour here, and the ArcViz interior. And this is specifically a ray tracing project. Shows off a couple of the capabilities of the engine with ray tracing features like ray traced ambient occlusion and stuff like that. You can download this for free. All you have to do is just click in here and then add it and then create a project. And yeah, basically download it. It's about 3 gigabyte, I think. So get a coffee, come back when it's done. But we can crack it open. Now, if you were going to start up your own ray tracing project, few considerations. Only ray trace cards are enabled, and at the moment, Windows is the only platform that's supported. So, for example, you might need an RTX 2070 or 2080. I think the GTX 1060s have ray tracing. Isn't that correct, Chris?
You think so?
And maybe
it'll run,
the Supers?
but you're often for that kind of situation, you're going to want to turn it off and on.
Yeah,
Depending
exactly.
on the scene.
Yep. And enabling ray tracing is as easy as going to Edit, Project Settings, going down to Rendering, and there's this little ray tracing option down here, if I can find it. Search, here we go. You can check this little checkbox. Now the scene here automatically enables this. Now, there is one other thing that you do need to do for this to work, and that is enable DirectX 12. So by default, the engine will use DirectX 11 in Windows. So you can go into the project settings here, click on Windows, and then select DirectX 12 here. That's pretty cool. You just have to restart the engine, and it will start up with that. Now, the first time that you enable ray tracing, it will compile all of the shaders of the engine again. So, like I said before, go and get another coffee, come back. Depending on your PC, it could take anywhere from about 5 minutes to maybe half an hour, depending on the specs of your PC. If you're someone like me with like a Ryzen 30, this is a bit of a humble brag, by the way, and you've got 32 cores, it's usually about 4 minutes. So, yeah. Now, we go back into the engine, and by default, if you've got ray tracing enabled, all of your lights support ray tracing out of the box. You can enable and disable this by selecting a light, and there is a ray tracing option. So you can choose to cast ray tracing shadows or not, or even affecting reflections and global illumination and stuff like that. There's quite a lot of little options here that allow you to change that stuff. Otherwise, you're using the same options that Chris mentioned with normal light usage, like changing intensity, light color, and stuff like that. It's automatically picked up by the engine. It uses a different shader path for the ray tracing, so it's pretty much a no-brainer usage. Now, obviously, ray tracing is a lot heavier than normal rendering or rasterized rendering. It does use like numbers of bounces and stuff like that to calculate, hey, what stuff is illuminated. But you get really cool results. So, like, for example, if I turn off this little light, you can see that in the environment, actually I'll change the post-process settings. This is something that you can add into the environment, like what Chris mentioned. There are a few extra settings in the post-process volume, like ray tracing ambient occlusion. You can change the number of samples per pixel, and that's on a screen space basis. And you can also enable and disable your ray tracing. So why is that not one tick? It's working before. Sorry, guys. Do I have this on real time? This should work. Here we go. It's probably because I've got sequencer open. Sorry, guys. Here we go. It was working before. What have I done? Cool. Let's just move on. You can change stuff like the number of bounces. So this affects stuff like light illuminating areas that aren't directly in line of sight of, say, a light around the environment. It's relatively easy to set up a scene with ray tracing. Of course, you saw. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. You saw that it's quite easy to just enable it into the engine. You can, if you were using Sequencer, which I highly recommend coming into the session for this, we can animate a light around. It's all lit dynamically. I'll re-enable this guy. For example, if I go to full screen and show this guy off, you can see the environment slowly getting lit and illuminated and moving around. And naturally, the frame rate is a little lower with ray tracing, so be aware that if you are trying to render quickly, enabling ray tracing will make a bit of a performance hit. But I definitely recommend you could definitely enable and disable ray tracing as necessary, including in those post-process volumes. That will save you performance, and that's pretty much it. Now it should be noted that, like Chris mentioned before, there is screen space GI. It doesn't work very well with ray tracing at the same time because obviously ray tracing provides that GI solution already. So I don't recommend using SSGI with ray tracing at the same time. However, what you can do is... sorry, my dog is whinging. Sorry, Evie, stop it. So, with ray tracing, I have lost my train of thought.
Do you want to take care of the dog?
Evie.
I'll quickly run through some learning samples with them.
Yes,
You can handle
please.
this in just a minute. Okay, go give the dog some pats, I guess. Okay. I'll tell you what. While we're handling the dog situation, I'm gonna quickly switch over to something that I want folks to really be aware of. So before, and my apologies for kind of doing this in a little bit of a strange order, but before, when Alex was scrolling through the learning samples that exist, one of the really important ones to be aware of is this one, this content examples. The content examples is just incredibly useful, and the reason for that is it's essentially all of the features in Unreal broken down into kind of nice, elegant, bite-sized setups. And you can kind of just scroll through any feature that I've really discussed today in a reasonably clean environment. So what I mean by that is, let's say we wanted to look at level workflow, right? Like you saw how today I blocked things out, I started to add meshes, and then I moved on to lighting and effects. Well, I mean, to do that, if I open level and then I look at the level design workflow example, for instance, what we're actually going to see is this. And what this is if I scroll down to here, we can see this is that first pass. This is that blocking out phase and how we handle it. If I was to go to the next area, we could see the same thing. I'm just going to hit play so I can run through them. But I can then see, hey, this is what an environment would generally look like with the next thing added, all the meshing. This is it when it has lighting. And this is it when it has polish and details and audio and effects and stuff. Um, so this kind of stuff's really useful because again, like if I wanted to look at before we were discussing lighting, right? So if I double click on the lighting level of the content examples, the lighting level is once again going to kind of break down different lights and what their effects are. So a point light is this, a spotlight is this, a directional light is coming through this area up top. I'm just going to hit play. So, we can see every single one of these things and we can see what the result is. A static light, for instance, can't cast a shadow against a dynamic object, but it will be fine casting a shadow against static objects. Stationary lights, over here, we can see they do cast shadows against dynamic objects, and that's the big difference. And then fully dynamic lights are going to have the same result. So, again, there's a lot of stuff here. Like I didn't get into some of these topics, get the look that I wanted to get rid of normals and stuff. This is building shaders because I broke them a little while ago, so it's still it'll be a minute. But essentially, what this is going to be doing is it'll actually show you different types of decal modes and what those can do and how to set them up, etc., etc. So having this content, which I'll be honest with you, I was going to be building shaders while we were waiting for Alex was running through his demo. Everything's all right. I've got 40 people saying it's back, which tells me that I dropped. Okay. Okay. Anyway, so as I said, this content examples is a really where were people when I dropped? I know I have to wait 10 seconds before I get the result here. But Alex, do you know where I was when it dropped for a second there? Okay, I'm not getting audio from Alex. That tells me that my internet dropped again.
Nope, I have myself muted. Sorry. You started about just at the start. Oh, we've dropped again a little bit.
I can hear you.
Internet's not stable.
Okay. My apologies, folks. I'm not sure why that's choosing now to dip when we were doing so well. Okay, it dropped at lighting types. So before I brought up lighting types, but it also has things right down to decal types, character animations. It has all sorts of setups here that you can kind of examine. What I was discussing before is, before I was trying different decal types to get the right effect, right? Remember when the cracks were also showing the cracks of the tiles, but I didn't want that? If you wanted to examine what different decal blend modes actually looked like, you could open the decals level and kind of examine, all right, so a basic decal is just projecting red onto the environment. But alternatively, I could kind of look at different things as well. So translucent is projecting that. Stain is just projecting the color and acting like a stain. Normal is only projecting the normal values back onto it. And this kind of stuff I think is just super powerful to have in its cleanest form. So I really want to stress that this project is essential for while you're learning Unreal to just, if you're poking at something and you're like, all right, how do lights work? Open it up. All right, how do decals work? Open it up. So you can see here how they work. Like this is just changing color. This is emissive. I can go over to here and we can see that this is masking that logo straight on. I can look at different types and how that affects it, etc., etc. So I strongly recommend checking out a bunch of these environments. But for now, what I'll do is I'll switch back to Alex, and he can finish up the ray tracing example he was giving without the dog. Alex, you're still muted. It'll be one minute.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Your stream just ended. Alex, you there? Thank you.
Yes, I am. Sorry, guys. Okay, you guys can see this now. As we can see, I finally got this. Let's see a difference between normal rendering.
Alex, your mic is cutting out now.
Okay, sorry, this internet.
All right. While Alex is fixing his audio, unfortunately, Alex moved into a new house yesterday, so he's had some teething issues.
Yeah, it's painful.
Okay, is that set up?
Yep, I think we're good now. Okay, so with ray tracing, one benefit of, if, as I was saying before, if you do encounter, you want to speed up your rendering with ray tracing, you can use the post-process volume to enable and disable global illumination and other, I guess, features of the ray tracing pipeline. So if you want, you could also use reflections and stuff like that. Actually, enabling ray tracing in Chris's sequencer demo, you can download from the Learn tab, is pretty damn spectacular. So definitely check that out. But if you want to optimize, you can actually use a combination of baked light maps and ray tracing. So you could have a post-process volume that's situated in a particular part of the environment that you really want to show off something like reflections and dynamic lights moving around the scene, stuff like that. And then have another post-process volume that just disables ray tracing everywhere else. So everywhere else it's just not used, use static lighting, and then when you move into that volume, it goes full ray traced. And that's the main tip that I have for people who want to improve their rendering times, especially while using ray tracing. And yeah, I'd like to just show this guy off once again. So being able to enable and disable, you can kind of see that there's a lot more bounce lighting moving around in the scene whenever you disable whenever you enable ray tracing, I should say. Apologies. And yeah, it's pretty cool, and that's pretty much it.
It might be worthwhile going into just the fact that you can set up some lights to do ray trace shadows and disable it.
Ah, yes, that was another one that I forgot. Cheers, Chris. Okay, so in particular with your lights, if you jump into a light, you have the option, just search for ray tracing, or just ray, and you can see that you can affect different aspects of the ray tracing pipeline. So if you want, you could have lights that are just completely baked or dynamic, but just not be ray traced. So it still goes through the normal rasterization pipeline, it just doesn't use ray tracing full stop. This can also save you quite a few clocks. So if you wanted, you could do something like all of your point lights inside an interior scene use ray tracing, but the global directional light might only use baked lighting, or vice versa. You might decide that actually I want to ray trace the sun movements and stuff like that. So you might have like a time of day example that uses full-on ray tracing, but then you'll bake the static point lights that are around the scene. And that's a really intelligent idea. Just to improve those render times. Now, you got to remember that you are working in a real-time engine, so if you want it to be real-time, sometimes you have to think a little bit about the optimization factor. But in all, the idea of a real-time engine is also to improve your workflow and speed up your development cycles. So being able to modify a level while someone else modifies the post-process settings, or changing lot tables and stuff like that, all in parallel, so you're not working in this staggered kind of linear approach where, oh no, we've got to change one of the shots for some animation that's happening earlier on. Oh, now we need to go through some NLE that is going to destroy that process later on. And if there's any changes, you have to go all the way back to the start. In Engine, you can just modify a variable, like in Sequencer, which you'll see in the Sequencer sessions coming up. Yeah. Is there anything else that you can think of, Chris, that I should cover?
I think discussing that there is a separation between ray tracing reflections and ray tracing GI. So, like, if you are running a slightly lower end card, it's worth pointing out that you can choose to just do ray traced reflections while not having ray traced global illumination. So this will reduce the overall weight of running real-time ray tracing and allow some lower-end cards to still have some pretty standout effects.
Yeah. So just being able to pick and choose what you really, really need is the biggest tool in your pocket, I think. So really just not throwing everything and the kitchen sink at a problem, but being particular, like what shot is this focusing on? Yep.
Yeah, but I mean, it does depend on the like how much of a beast your machine is really. So yeah, don't. It's one of those things that try what you wanted and then dial back things if required, really. But yeah, if there's nothing else that you wanted to cover, I guess let's go into Q and A across the board. Oh, you killed your stream. You got to give me a warning. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to Q and A now. So if anyone does have any questions, I'm more than happy to kind of start going through some of that. And I'm more than happy to answer some questions. If any of you did miss last night's session, we're happy to have a bit of a chat about the program itself and things like that. Now, it is worth noting that the number of entries that are going through the program was increased and announced last night. Is Tony still on the call, or is he Tony still part of the session? No,
I'm not actually too sure.
So yeah, it has been increased. I believe it was to 16.
Yeah, it was 16 potential finalists that go to the final.
So there are more folks getting potential funding for their projects. So it's less competitive in a way. So that's great. But a couple of questions that have popped up here. Let's run through them. Alex, you've got a couple of ray tracing questions for you. We've had questions just. Is ray tracing mainly used to merge? Is ray tracing mainly used to merge virtual graphics with real life footage? I'll answer that one. So ray tracing is basically to try and get the most realistic result, like on the fly from a changing environment, really. So being able to get like realistic reflections and realistic global illumination, certain environments aren't going to need that. You know, if you're doing a really cute toon shaded type of thing, then there's a good chance you won't have reflections at all. You know, or they'll be dialed back in certain ways. And so it's not about whether you're mixing real life footage. It's about the final result that you're after. And I do want to stress as well, ray tracing is not just for realism either. There are plenty of toon styles, like that could easily be utilizing ray traced reflections. Like if you did something that had a lot of plastic in it, or something that like you wanted to look like to have shiny surfaces for various reasons, like leveraging ray tracing for something like that would be beneficial too.
Yeah. Will Duan asks, why did you say earlier that you wouldn't recommend SSGI and ray tracing at the same time? Well, ray tracing already has a global illumination option. So SSGI, how SSGI works is it only illuminates from what light sources it can see. So for example, if you put say you occlude an area and you look behind that area, then you may not get bounce lighting from a light source that's behind that, for example. Or and in general, like ray tracing actually has. So if you've got a light that's behind you and is out of view, it's already it already knows that light is there. So when it passes rays through the scene, it can bounce behind nooks and crannies, whereas screen space GI is kind of like this magical, cheap way that, Chris is probably a better person to describe it.
It's bouncing light sources that it can see, really. So, but no, we've had a couple of other questions that have popped up. So one has come down to, like, should we be using the BSP pipeline or static meshes? A couple of people have asked this question in different ways. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using static meshes for your core pipeline. And I didn't mean to dissuade people from that. I personally find that if I'm blocking out a space, I work better in BSP and then filling it with stuff from another thing. I find it better for me to work with BSP in interior environments and then fill it with static meshes as required. But that is, completely up to completely up to you with how you approach it. We've had another question saying, do we have artistic freedom on the render style? Yes, 100%, unequivocally, yes. That's there's definitely been some relaxed ways in that we've approached some of the terms and conditions for the contest, and one of them was very much leaving it up to you. Is Tony there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, sorry, Tony. I didn't realize you'd dropped back in.
I'd forgotten to turn my mic back on, while I was enjoying my
Got it.
saffron roasted pistachios, as one does.
Oh, of course. Did you want to answer that question a little bit more thoroughly?
No, you nailed it. We're looking for that creative edge. So do it your way. We don't want to be prescriptive about it.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to switch over the camera, by the way, to the Zoom call, so people can at least see who's talking right now.
Does that mean I have to turn my camera on?
I mean,
we always want to see your pretty face, Tony.
I'm in my Unreal pajamas. It's fine.
That's it. So switch over to that. Cool. Now, were there any other questions that we had as far as the rest of it was concerned? Doubling up on what Daniel Miller said, can you import clips for animated 2D sprites, or do they need to be a sprite sheet? If you're asking about whether you can use media textures, you probably shouldn't. You should probably roll, like, you can use media textures for certain things, but I would be more likely to use a media texture for like actually playing videos. Let's say my TV needed to have something on it that was at a higher FPS. I could be just playing a video in engine off of that. If, however, I wanted to have something like Sprite, where I want to have thousands or millions of sprites in real time, then you're going to use a flipbook. Is there a way to stream mocap data into Unreal and live clean up the data? You can stream mocap data into Unreal. However, I can't recall how the cleanup process works. You could potentially clean it up to a certain degree, but I'm not 100% sure myself on how the pipeline for some of the cleanup on that would actually work. So I'm sorry that I have limited assistance on that one.
So as far as streaming mocap data, you can do take recorder and then use sequencer to then clean up the positioning of that data. So if you could even do something like using control rig for, maybe you want to do like I'm going to use an arbitrary character here, like maybe you want to have someone animating out a gorilla, for example, right? Obviously gorillas have longer arms than people and shorter legs, so maybe you want to do something like control rig where you dynamically retarget that human skeleton to a gorilla skeleton. And kind of animate that around. Then after you've done the tech, then you can take that back into sequencer, and you might want to adjust positions of hands. Now, one other cool thing about using a real-time engine is you could also run something called animation blueprints in the background. And it can dynamically check for collisions. So if you want to make sure that hands at a certain point place onto the ground, you can also use physics to kind of place that using IK. Now I'm totally nerding out. Don't get too scared. This is something that you'll, like, just with more use of the engine, you'll get used to these ideas.
So we've had a couple of other questions that have popped up. Take recorder was just mentioned. So for anyone that's unaware of what take recorder is, take recorder allows you to do mocap into the engine, but to just really quickly just do multiple takes. So you can just be like, save it, and then cycle back through what did take 1 look like, what did take 2 look like, what did take 3 look like, etc., etc. So that kind of tool is built in, and we are really trying to push into that whole workflow, because it's worth noting that when we say mocap is supported in the engine, we're not talking, oh hey, it's mocapping a skeleton in the engine that's just looking like a skeleton does. Alex is showing off based on the YouTube comments. So when it comes to that though, what happens is it actually is passing that information straight to your character. So what you actually see in the scene that's being mocapped is the final high quality production worthy character, and that's really exciting because you could have a character with a cape or with physics bits and what hair or fur or whatever, and as the mocap is going on, you're actually seeing the final result in real-time ray traced quality, which is rad. Cool. So any other questions that have popped up? For the pictures, can we add supporting visual material, storyboards, look dev, references? I believe we can. Does it come down to how they submit to the agencies, Tony, or how does that work exactly?
Sorry, run that by me again.
You're still talking about clothing on the chat.
I really yes.
So the question. Now they're all discussing socks. Okay. The question is the question was regarding supplementary material for your pitches. So can you submit storyboards, look dev, or references?
Yeah, absolutely. As per to the discussion last night, anything that sells your idea to us, anything that helps convey it, explains it to us, that's really what we need. So you can add as much or as little as you want.
I mean, I think when you are pitching, my personal advice here is definitely, you don't need to do as much as you can, but you need to really be able to demonstrate that this is achievable. That you've got the right folks together who are doing their lessons and able to stay on top of things, and that this project is achievable, and that you do have a vision for what that final output is going to look like. Is it okay if the story only happens outdoors? Oh yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
100%. This was an interior. This was just to start you off seeing the editor, getting an idea of just basic meshing and setting things up. The next lesson is all outdoors. So I mean, if your presentation, like if your final short film happens to be a short, I don't know, kayaking trip or something that's exclusively outside, then that's totally fine. If your project happens to be a short film that's a horror looking thing that's purely claustrophobic and inside, that's totally fine. I mean, at the same time as well, I mean, for all we know, what you're going to submit is going to be a 2D film. As long as it's being made in Unreal and it's utilizing this tech and leveraging, things like sequencer, it's up to you as to what you want to create, and we're just trying to encourage people to use real-time tools.
So I'm starting to see a trend here. Maybe we should just replace the.
I think. Oops, sorry about that. Had a bit of a drop on the internet.
Great.
Can we see that? I'd have to go and get them. They are actually socks, by the way. That wasn't a made-up thing.
Does the film entry have to fit any classification guidelines, PG, etc.?
No. Obviously, be mindful of the content. Nothing offensive. Epic is just not that kind of company. We don't subscribe to, endorse in any way, and we've actually got quite clear guidelines on that. So, yeah, keep it reasonable. But no, if you wanted to make something MA, that's absolutely fine. I should not have read that last comment.
Any other questions?
No, is the answer to that one.
Okay, well, in that case, thank you all very much for coming. I hope to see some of you in a few hours' time for the outdoor environment session that we'll be running. And I guess I'll chat to you all then. It's worth noting, just before everyone disappears, that there was a change to the timetable last night. The last few sessions next week were moved around a little bit so that all of the evening sessions this week would be daytime sessions next week, and all of the daytime sessions this week would be evening sessions next week. That way, if you're in a slightly more difficult situation for managing these things, hopefully this is going to be more conducive to your environment. But yep, thank you all very much for coming, and I hope this was of some use. Have a good day.
Bye.
Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a ball now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now?